this class online. Thank you so much for your class, Prabhu. It was wonderful. And I especially took note for the last one since I turned 41 just a week ago. And Prabhu was saying, we don't have much time. Suddenly you're 40 and it's like, we might just have 20 years left of active service, So even if we can't do big things, do the small things with great love. That's a nice meditation. So thank you for that, Prabhu. So today's class, as you see, we're looking at Canto 6, Chapter 14, text 21 to 26, continuing with the story of Chitraketu. And as I was reading through the verses, the theme that stood out for me was neurotic needs and the art of prayer, or to put it in more Vaishnava language, the nature of material desires and the secret to breakthrough in chanting the holy name. So, in a moment, I would like to invite you to reflect upon the topic and try to think of a question that is relevant for you, because Srila Prabhupada wrote or said in a class in 75, be engaged always in reading Srimad Bhagavatam, discussing among yourselves. Then you make progress. You should take it with the consciousness that we have to learn something, not simply attending the class, but to learn something. In this way, make your life successful. So ISKCON is an educational institute, so I always like to invite us to push the boundaries of our understanding and application. So we all know something about, material expectations and attachments, and we know something about the art of prayer and the art of chanting. So, think about it, like what is it that I really need to know, and what is it I still can't consistently practice. But before we come to that, let me just give us a little context here. So we're in the 6th canto, and the 6th canto, Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments, shows the Lord's affection for his devotees. And in the 6th canto, we have 3 devotees that are sort of outstanding. We have Ajamil, we have Indra, and we have King Chitraketu. So it is shown how the Lord gives protection to his devotees by showing these 3 devotees. And what Sri Vishwanath points out, which is very interesting, is that all these 3 devotees, in one way or another, transgress the laws of Dharma. You see, Ajamil did it one way, but still the Lord gave them protection. So it gives us some soothing reassurance that even though we might have challenges in our Krishna consciousness, Srimadan Mohan can still give us protection. So in the 14th chapter, we're describing Chitraketu and how he, by the mercy of devotees, obtained a son who brought happiness and also distress by his death. So just one reference here to inspire our attention, because we have to know why something is important to pay attention to it. So I'd like to start with a reference about the Mahatmyam, the glories of hearing. Srila Prabhupada writes in 177, simply by hearing the Vedic literature Srimad Bhagavatam, one can have direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and thereby one can attain the highest perfection of life by transcending worldly miseries, illusion, and fearfulness. These are practical tests for one who has actually given a submissive hearing to the readings of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So 3 things are supposed to disappear as you really absorb the teachings of the scripture. What were those 3 things? He says, anxiety or fear, exactly. Illusion, all kinds of lies and misconceptions, and then just suffering, miseries. And it was funny because yesterday, after we had our seminar, I took the bicycle, took a ride downtown. I had to do some errands and buy some practical things. And then when I got out, I had lost track of time. It was pitch black. And it's a long road back. And it was very interesting because, as I was going downtown, it was just sunset and everything was like bathed in golden color. It was so beautiful. I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. The mercy of God. And then as I was coming back, everything was black and scary. And it reminded me that actually you know, everything is always beautiful, but when there is no light of truth, that's like in our lives. If we're not aware of the truth, then we feel scared by things that happen. But actually everything is still the beautiful trees and landscape, it's just dark. So all I had was a, you know, torchlight from my phone, and it would sort of illuminate just maybe a meter ahead of me. Everything else was just black. So for me, that was a reminder that if one has faith, maybe you can't see the whole way, but you just take one step at a time, right? And that maintains you one step at a time. You don't have to see everything. You can't see everything, you know. Probably if God would show you the whole way immediately, you know, maybe we will be overwhelmed by the whole journey, but just one step at a time. And then the funny thing was, so that mostly when I was like going through the pathway through the, you know, the fields and, you know, the greenery, it was pitch black, no light bulbs or anything. But then every now and then you would come to a little village, and then there were like lights. And then I thought this represents like when you come across like teachers or books that illuminates a part of the journey, right? Gives you like some landmarks. And it feels like, oh, I know where I am. I get a little orientation. And then you come into places that is unknown in your spiritual journey. Sometimes they call them liminal spaces. You know, you come to the threshold of what you know. And then what is really required is an act of faith. You know, so you have to live on that faith. And then another thing that happened was every now and then a car would come by from the other way. And then they would temporarily like light up the whole way. And for that, I thought that it would illuminate or exemplify for me, like when you have association with other devotees, it illuminates a little more of your path, you know, temporarily, till you're on your own again. So it ended up being quite an instructive ride back, even though it was scary. But I found I wasn't as scared as before. Maybe the readings of the Bhagavatam were having some effect. So, all right. Okay, let's bring that a little forward just so we can see that. Thank you so much for being here. So consider the topic of today, material desires, neurotic expectations or needs, and the art of prayer, and the secret of chanting. And consider, what do I really need to know? What don't I quite understand? What is the boundary of my understanding and application? So we'll take a moment to reflect so that we make the topic more relevant, actually, not just a routine. Right. Did everybody find some reflection? How many found a question? Raise your hand. Okay. Maybe one or two people can share something that came to their mind. Catherine, would you like to share?
So like the idea of becoming less selfish and more selfless.
Right. Exactly. And what about it?
Just to get the focus like less on myself and my own like ideas of what I need for myself, and more like in this case of gratitude and giving.
Right. How do we transit from that to the other? Yeah. Right. It's a big challenge. Thank you. Very good. For me, in my whole spiritual life has been so much about, okay, once I learn where I am and where I want to go, the real question is, how do you get there? How do you bridge the gap? And Govinda, you had also some reflection?
Yeah, in discussing Srimad Bhagavatam, we get like some, how to say, street marks or street signs, so to say. We can find several directions for our life, or we can also get sometimes little corrections also in comparing to our normal standard that we were educated with here in the material society, so to say, and in the Western society where spirituality is just, I don't know, something for your hobby or your free time maybe.
Right, part-time.
Yeah, some part-time, you can share it for your own, it's okay, but do it somewhere else, you know, not come too close to the point with it, and so on.
Isn't it funny, like if you're like pursuing, like, let's say, a sport on an elite level, people admire your dedication. Oh my God, he practices, I don't know, 6 hours a day. But if you do the same dedication for spiritual subjects, people think you're weird. Okay, go ahead.
Everything is on the other side, on the material plane, just weight. There's no real meaning for it, no sense. Then just maybe to get some appreciation by others, or maybe some good feeling for one's own pride, for one's own negative qualities in the mind, and nothing else to get. So somehow for me the question is very substantial, so to say, to deal with this topic of Srimad Bhagavatam and to get some inspiration, to get some good example, or to hear about some good examples also from holy men and sages that went the path already before myself, so that I can learn by their example how to...
It's so important to have role models, right? Exactly. Wonderful, wonderful reflection. Vyapati, you had also something?
So when I think of material desires and the art of chanting, so I guess for me, so what is coming in my mind, the main point, all of us we know theoretically a lot, but practically, so in Jnana and Vijnana, so that's I guess the biggest problem.
Exactly.
So, and yes, and also on the other hand, material desires and art of chanting. So actually we do chant to lose these material desires, right? So through chanting we should understand that material desires are connected with our bodies. So it's not as important, or not important as the soul. So that's what I'm thinking about. So actually, and of course through this discussing of Srimad Bhagavatam, we get this actually Vijnana, right?
Exactly. So. Beautiful. So the really interesting, important thing is this Vijnana, how to transfer to Vijnana. And especially in terms of our chant, because the chanting is supposed to create the Vijnana, right? And if it doesn't, then, you know, what is wrong? Thank you very much. Wonderful reflections. Yeah, you had another thing?
So this point from Vijnana to realization.
Right.
And there's also a nice explanation that came to my mind with this several levels on which consciousness can be, like just the animal stage of how to say, eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and so on, up to the level of Gyanamoy, Vijnanamoy, and then at the highest level, that's what also came to my mind why I want to go deeper into things. And one see, how to say, advanced devotees in their higher ages, when elder people just go to retirement normally, and they are somehow upset, or they are just confused, or they are just become bewildered by their material problems that they have with their old age and pain, so to say, that the body also creates. But in comparison to that, to see the devotees, the elder devotees, with shining lights in their eyes, and just being somehow confident, just being somehow happy, and how to say, giving a glimpse of what means this Ananda Moy also, that platform where one is just in bliss with the realization.
We come back to what Vyapati was saying yesterday, you know, we're all going to get old, and it's coming sooner than you think. And so you've got to do the Vijnana work today, otherwise we'll end up like pensioners, like disillusioned, feeling regret. So thank you so much. Just making it really real for us. It's not the theory, it's reality. Jai. All right, so let's turn to the verses. So I see you have the last verse on the board, right? So I guess I'm gonna read the previous ones and then we can chant this one together. Atmana priyate natma paratasvata evava lakshaye labda kamam tvam chintaya shabalam mukam evam vikalpito rajan vidusha muninapisa prashrayavanto vyaha prajakamastato munim Chitraketuruvacha Bhagavan Kimna Viditam Tapo Jnana Samadhivi Yoginam Vastapapanam Bahiranta Sharirishu Tatapi Prichatu Bruyam Brahmancha Atmani Chintitam Bhavato Vidushas Chapi Choditas Tad Anugyaya Lokapalai Api Pratya Samrajyaishvarya Sampada Nanandayantya Prajamam Vishutrit Kama Hivapare. This one. Kindly repeat. Tata Pahi Mahabhaga Purvai Sahagatam Tama Yata Tarema Dushparam Prajayata Videhina Tata Pahi Mahabhaga Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha Yata Tarema Dushparam Prajayata Videhina Tata Pahi Mahabhaga Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha Yata Tarema Dushparam Prajayata Videhina
Tata Pahi Mahabhaga Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha Yata Tarema Dushparam Prajayata Videhina
Tatapahi Mahabhaga
Tatapahi Mahabhaga
Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha
Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha
Yatare Madushparam
Yata Tarema Dushparam
Jayata Videhina
Prajayata Videhina Vaishnavis
Tatapahi Mahabhaga
Tatapahi Mahabhaga Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha Yata Tarema Dushparam Prajayata Videhina
Tatapahi Mahabhaga
Tatapahi Mahabhaga
Purvai Sahagatam Tamaha
Yata Tarema Dushparam Prajayata Videhina Tataha. Therefore, because of this, Pahi, kindly save, Mahabhaga, O great sage, Purvai Saha, along with my forefathers, Gatam, gone, Tamaha, to darkness, Yatha, so that Tarema, we can cross. Dushparam, very difficult to cross. Prajaya, by getting a son. Tat, that. Videhi, kindly do. Naha, for us. Translation. Well, let's read the whole thing. beginning from text 21. The great sage Angira said, O King Chitraketu, I can observe that your mind is not pleased. You seem not to have achieved your desired goal. Is this because of you yourself, or has it been caused by others? Your pale face reflects your deep anxiety. Shukadeva Goswami said, O King Parikshit, although the great sage Angira knew everything, he inquired from the king in this way. Thus King Chitraketu, desiring a son, bent low in great humility and spoke to the great sage as follows. Suddenly went deaf. Got stunned by the verses.
If you like, I can give you my phone. So you can use it.
Thank you. I think you get it up. It was just an ecstatic symptom. Okay. So King Chitraketu said, O great Lord Angira, because of austerity, knowledge, and transcendental samadhi, you are free from all the reactions of sinful life. Therefore, as a perfect yogi, you can understand everything, external and internal, regarding embodied conditioned souls like us. O great soul, you're aware of everything, yet you're asking me why I'm full of anxiety. Therefore, in response to your order, let me disclose the cause. As a person aggrieved by hunger and thirst is not pleased by the external gratification of flower garlands or possessions which are desirable. Hang on, I jumped over there. As a person aggrieved by hunger and thirst is not pleased by the external gratification of flower garlands or sandalwood pulp, I am not pleased with my empire, opulence, and possessions, which are desirable even for great demigods, because I have no son. Therefore, O great sage, please save me and my forefathers who are descending to the darkness of hell, because I have no progeny. Kindly do something so that I may have a son to deliver us from hellish conditions. Srila Prabhupada comments on this last verse. According to Vedic civilization, one gets married simply to have a son who is needed to offer oblations to his forefathers. King Chitraketu responsibly desired to beget a child so that he and his forefathers might be delivered from the darkest regions. He was concerned with how to get pinda or oblations in the next life, not only for himself but also for his forefathers. Therefore, he requested Angira Rishi to favor him by doing something that could help him get a son. So the verse was, Tatapahi Mahabhaga Pravaisaha Katam Tama Yatatare Matushparam Prajayatat Videhina. Therefore, O great sage, please save me and my forefathers who are descending to the darkness of hell, because I have no progeny. Kindly do something so that I may have a son to deliver us from hellish conditions. So, as I said, a central theme here is material desires. And I use the more modern expression, ego passion or neurotic needs. But let's just put the terminology in context. The Sanskrit term for the anartha known as material desires is asat trishna. Trishna means a thirst. You're really thirsty. And asat means for that which is unreal. So it's one kind of anartha or like material impediment on the spiritual path. You want to really satisfy your highest, deepest necessities of soul, but then you have another part of your mind that is like really holding on to something that is unreal. So in Western context, people speak of ego passions. Sometimes we speak of the passion of Christ, but passion also means suffering. So, but in this context, as like a very intense desire. Material desire. So I would like us to go through 7 characteristics of material desires and expectations, or ego passions. And just like Govinda Kun was saying, there is so much to be learned from the example and experiences of the Bhagavatam. So I've tried to distill it to bring clarity to what we're talking about. So the first characteristic of material desires is that ego passions are painful desires. It's very interesting. You know, in verse 39, this expression is used, painful desires, or a painful sense of lack, a sense of inner deficiency. And therefore we saw Angira using the expression, your mind is not pleased, you have not achieved your desired goal, you're full of anxiety. So material desires are like an insatiable hunger. Insatiable hunger. And what's interesting is because they are so intense, so they bring frustration by their very nature. Right? Because if you desire something too big and too much, and it's something that is not possible to satisfy, so what you're left with is with your own frustration, right? So it's self-frustrating because of its own excess, because you're asking for more than can be expected, especially on a material platform. In the Bhagavatam, it is said that the material intelligence has 3 characteristics, and one of them is that you hanker for what cannot be obtained. It's interesting. Spiritually, it can be obtained, but on a practical level, it cannot be obtained, because this world is a world that is limited and temporary. So what is it I want? I want security, or I want perfection, or I want perfect love. You know, it will always be limited by the material reality. So the first thing to recognize is that just becoming mindful of how much tension and actually oppression my material expectations bring me. Because if I'm not aware, there's something in psychotherapy that we call mindful addiction. It's like the step before you can actually give up an addiction is sort of tasting your sleep or your bad habit. What does it feel to be a victim of this desire, right? Because if you just judge yourself and hate yourself, then it takes away from learning. You get distracted from actually experiencing what does it feel to be addicted to a material desire. But if you don't judge and you just say, okay, here I go again with my material desires, and I just try to be mindful of it, then I actually experience that even though there is always a trailer and a commercial, like, you're gonna become happy if you get this. In the actual process of trying to fulfill that, there's so much frustration and pain. And you can see that it will gradually change your heart. Right? So the first thing to really be aware of is that material desires are painful desires. So this is a paradigm shift, because the conditioned soul thinks that, you know, desires are something worshipable. Just, you know, that's what the material civilization does. It just encourages us to desire more and more and more. You know? That's what's quite amazing, is that the world says that through increase of greed you can become happy, while the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita says that, you know, this material desire is the cause of suffering. So that's the first thing to be mindful of. The second characteristic of material desires is that despite great consummate effort, they remain inadequately satisfied. The other group, can you read this quotation? I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it.
Okay, great.
Generally, the materialistic mind think and discuss about subjects which satisfy their senses. But as these things are exercised under the influence of the external, usually energy, such sensual activities do not actually give them any satisfaction. On the contrary, they become full with cares and anxieties. This is called Maya, or what is not. That which cannot give them satisfaction is accepted as an object for satisfaction.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because once again Chitraketu is an extreme example. How many wives did Chitraketu have? Anyone remember? 10 million wives. I mean, I cannot conceive. Okay, he was the emperor of the world, but still 10 million wives. So I think maybe we can at least take the lesson that, you know, all the wives, so many wives could not satisfy his desire. So it's amazing that neurotic needs are not satisfied in the real world because their passion nature is like a bottomless pit. Doesn't matter how much you feed it. And I think the clue is in the next characteristic, that ego desires are a substitute for spiritual needs, right? So it's like you are pursuing something that is good, but just in the wrong place and in the wrong way. So I have one anecdote for you and a practical story. One, let's start with a story. I remember once in my dream I was partaking of a Sunday feast. I guess because I was hungry. And guess what? When I woke up, I was still hungry. Because, you know, the dream has no relationship with your actual need. And the anecdote is about this funny figure known as Nasruddin in Middle East. He's a wise man that teaches lessons through funny anecdotes. So the story goes that once Nasruddin was looking for his keys out there in the road. So after some time a friend came by and said, "What you looking for?" And he said, "I lost my keys." So the friend started feeling in the grass, helping his Nasruddin to try to find his key. And after, you know, unsuccessful attempt, he asked him, "Are you sure you lost them here?" And Nasruddin says, "No, I lost them at home."
Oh.
He said, "Why are we here?" He says, "Because there's more light here."
Oh no.
You know? So in the same way, we've lost the actual spiritual need within the heart. But at home, maybe there's not enough light. So often when we go inside, initially there's not much light. And we feel, okay, this is not the right place. So we go out into the world. Seems to have more light and more possibilities like that. But it's just an illusion, right? So actually the desire is right. Perfection, love, value as a person, creativity, whatever you want in life, happiness, but it's just looking at for the wrong place. So, as time is limited, so I'm going to go a little quicker here. I'm going to jump over this quotation here and come to the next characteristic, which is that ego passions remove our capacity for contentment and gratitude. So not only your actual ambition is never really satisfied, but because you aim so high, you lose the ability to be grateful for what you do have. That's another thing, you know. And then he says that painful desires are rooted in a primary fear. So it's interesting that all material ambitions are actually based in a kind of a fear. What is it? I think it's in the 11th canto that says that when we think that there is something else than Krishna, then fear is created in our heart, isn't it? That's in the Bhagavatam. It says when you think there's something else in absolute goodness, you experience fear, right? So actually then this fear creates the ambitions because you're trying to counteract your insecurity. So let's say when I'm not in touch with the absolute goodness of my nature, spiritual nature, what I fear is that I'm a bad person. If you cannot feel your goodness, you feel I'm bad, right? And therefore, the desire that comes from that fear is the desire for perfection. I want to improve myself. I want to perfect myself so that I feel good and worthwhile, you know? But it doesn't matter how much I try to improve myself, there's always something wrong with the material identity. So it becomes an endless enterprise. And then we have this, that after a short-lived thrill, ultimately one's lamentation grows like a blazing fire. So not only is it hard to get, even after you get, like King Chitraketu, he got a son, but then he lose the son. And there was so much suffering. So this brought my memory to something I read in the Dyuna Maharaj was sharing with us. If we can shift it a little so we can see the Sanskrit words. There are 7 defects with all material pleasures, goals, and relationships. And we'll finish with this. Alpa, they are deficient, poor, unsatisfying in quality and quantity. Their results are meager and too little. So it doesn't matter, you know, even when you get what you want, it never lives up to your expectation. 2, astira, they don't last or remain. They are short-lived, flickering, transient, impermanent, and unreliable. So that's the next disappointment. 3, asukara, they are troublesome, difficult and not easy, time and effort consuming, not easily realized or sustained. It's so hard. When you actually realize Brahmananda, like spiritual bliss in your heart, it's unconditional. You always have it. Asukha vasana, the material desires, they end in unhappiness, disappointment, disillusionment, leaving a bitter aftertaste, frustration, sadness, and grief, which was really clear in the example of King Chitraketu. Dukhanvitam, they are mixed with suffering and distress, so there is no pure material happiness. There's always pain with it. It's like eating sweet rice with sand in it. Hare Krishna. And then anuchitam, they are alien, incompatible, and unbefitting with our higher spiritual nature, with our higher being. So for a spiritual soul, material sense gratification is like junk food. It's not like really good food, it's just garbage. And then abhimana mula, they are the root or foundation and cause of the false ego, because they perpetuate the faulty sense of identity. Because to enjoy through the body, I have to identify myself with the body, right? And then what happens once I'm identified with the body, whatever suffering the body experiences, I think I am experiencing, right? So these are the 7 defects according to Vedanta Deshikant from Prapanda Parijata. I'll put that in the Limasam sharing this. So, and finally they said that when our ambitions are frustrated, we blame God. We'll see. You know, when Chitraketu lost his son, and then his wife was lamenting, and she turned and blamed God for it, or everything, you know. He said, the cause of lamentation is the Lord. You're inimical to us by making us suffer. You're certainly our enemy. The Lord is inexperienced, childish. He has made his creation improperly. And I think this is like an autobiography of every soul. We try to get something, we tell God what to give us, we even tell saintly person how to bless us, you know, and then when we get something and we lose it, and then we suffer, and then we blame them. So I remember in a Bhagavad class in Vrindavan, Prabhupada was saying that we should not order or instruct the Lord. That's why we have this verse in Shikshashtakam where Mahaprabhu prays, Nadhanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Vajagadishakamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Bhavata Bhakti Rahaituki. Says, I don't want anything of this world, I just want love for you, pure love. And then he surrenders, Ainanda Tanuja Kinkara. I'm your servant, I'm a lost servant, suffering in this world, please just take me back. So you know what's good for me, you know, so if we actually surrender and take our cues from the Lord, through his representatives and through the scriptures, and try to pursue those desires, then we can actually have satisfaction.
I have some.
We'll come to that in a moment here. So there was so much more. I think it's a good sign because Bhagavatam is so rich. But what I wanted to just touch upon when it comes to our chanting, one last point about the chanting, because like Vyapaprabhu was saying, you know, how do we translate to the Vijnana? So let me just fast forward here to just one commentary on the chanting. Yes, and it's the idea that whenever we cultivate intense bhakti, all that is in opposition to it will surface. So you should understand that just like, you know, when you illuminate, that you can see the let's say a room that hasn't been cleaned for years, and then you put on the light and you see how dirty it is. So once we bring attention and sincerity to our chanting, what will happen is that the impurities that are there will come to our awareness, right? And so, let me see. Okay, let's not go there. And there are specifically 5 layers of ignorance or anartha that we'll have to go through. So we'll get in touch with our resentment, anger, and aggression. That's one layer of illusion or ignorance according to Bhagavatam, created by Brahman. The next is our sense of vulnerability, danger, mortality. Ultimately, that I can be killed. The third one is my dependency upon matter for happiness. And then just my identification with my body and mind. And finally, the inability to know my spiritual identity. So we should be mindful that when we bring sincerity to our chanting, these impurities will come to the surface, and the temptation is that we give up or get distracted in our chanting because it's uncomfortable, right? But that's the point where you need to bring perseverance and determination and not go off track. It's just like, I've studied once exorcism for a couple of years. Funny. Because I found that the stages of exorcism reflects the stages of anartha-nivritti. Because when you come to stage of expelling like a demon or ghost, first there is just a presence. You feel there's something wrong, but it's not visible because the demon is hiding behind the personality of the person that is possessed. Right? They must, thank you very much for your prayers. I'm healed now. I can go. But once the priest persists with the prayers, there's a point, they say a break point, where the devil shows itself. Because what is impure is uncomfortable in the presence of purity. And then comes the clash, like the fight between the will of the devil and the will of the soul. Right? So this is what we've experienced, that when we bring like sincerity to our prayer, we will get in touch with our material desires and impurities, and they want to distract us. But if you persist and you really pray to Krishna to take it away, right, then through the grace of God, the impurities are taken away. And only then we can really have spiritual realization. If we give up whenever it gets hard, then we'll remain victims of the material ambitions for eternity. So it's just one little tip when it comes to a key to having more realization. You have to go through the fight, the battle of becoming aware of and letting go of the material passion. All right, so let's stop here and see if there's one a comment or a question before we on the prasada.
Would you have maybe a question to this inner anarthas? Is there a method or do you have a idea how to become aware of anarthas that we sometimes maybe in our normal service, in our normal spiritual life, are not aware of? I mean, we can see sometimes when we go to holy places like Vrindavan, for example, very quickly we become aware of it, or we see the mirror, so to say, clearer, and we see what is there still in us. Exactly. But when we are somewhere else, where the consciousness is more westernized, or more, how to say, a little bit more closer to the modes of material nature. Exactly. And we know that we want to work on spiritual purification, but we are not really aware about where to start or what are these anarthas in us, because we do not recognize them. Exactly. Is there any key, or is there a method somehow to get aware of these things also, even if we are...
Excellent question. Very sincere question. Exactly. I guess two things I could share. One is be mindful of your frustrations and your resentment and your irritations, because therein is a cue to your expectations. You see, what I discovered when I did Kartik Vrata, or a month of intensified practice in India, I discovered that there's a difference between prayer and demanding expectation, right? So I find if even my so-called spiritual prayer brings resentment, that it means there's some material expectation in my prayer, right? So So if I feel resentful, frustrated, and upset, then it always tells me that my prayer is a little mixed with material expectations. So then I could do some introspection and see, what is it that I'm expecting that is not happening, right? So that's one clue. And then the other one is, of course, if we can bring attention and depth to our chanting, because there is 5 layers of obstruction in prayer. One is we fall asleep, the other one is we're distracted, and the third one is we're awake and attentive, but there's no depth of engagement, there's no heart, there's no personal involvement. So the key is, if I can be awake, attentive, and have a spiritual desire or aspiration, that I have a sense of meaning in what I'm doing, then that will bring me to Kashaya. Kashaya means that the impurities will come to the surface. Then I will become aware during my chanting that what is the anartha that I need to work on, right? So, for example, what I found, I can just share this, is that I became aware that I was expecting emotional gratification through my prayer life. So I understood one of my anarthas is I'm looking for emotional gratification in whatever I do. And if it's like dry or just neutral, then I think something's wrong. But no, if you're sincerely worshiping Radha Madan Mohan, whether there is emotional gratification or not, it's still fully blessed and wonderful, right? Because there is a difference between spiritual happiness and emotional gratification. Sometimes people think my emotional gratification is spiritual happiness. But no, spiritual happiness centered around love for Krishna. Emotional gratification is just my mind feeling comfortable, and maybe I like intense feelings, like that. So when I was in Vrindavan, I was expecting some sort of intense, ecstatic feelings, but it didn't come. Instead, I saw how deep my material desires went, and I learned humility, a little more humility, instead of ecstasy. So those 2 things I would recommend. To be mindful of my resentment and frustration as a clue to my expectations, and then to really bring attention and depth to my chanting so that Kashaya can happen, my impurities can be illuminated. Any last thing before we go?
So is it like the more intense like your japa is,
right,
then the more that the anarthas will come up?
Exactly. So that's good news, right? Because when you don't know, it's like, why is this happening? Something's wrong. But that's supposed to happen. Kashaya, and then you have a breakthrough where you start to actually experience greater spiritual nourishment. But then the temptation is the next one, because of Rasa Svada, where you try to enjoy Krishna. There's a difference between devotion and then when there's just implicit happiness in your selflessness. But then the ego is like, oh, this is amazing, I feel so good, and then you try to hold on to it and control it, and then you lose it again, because you lose the selflessness. So if we can go through this, and then we can just allow the happiness to be, and then it sort of remains, and it might change, because there's variety in spiritual happiness. Our temptation, because we don't trust, we want to hold on to good things, but actually God is unlimited. I think it was Prabhupada's father who said, God has 10 hands, so if one gives you something, how much can you, catch? And if he wants to take something away from you, how much can you hold back? So actually everything that happens in the life of a spiritual aspirant is a form of grace, whether it is pleasurable or a little difficult, right? So instead of sort of trying to control and hold on, we should just practice sobriety and just let go of your plan, let go of your control, and be mindful of what is actually happening here, and try to cooperate with God's arrangement moment by moment in your life. It's a quite a spiritual practice. Always being mindful of what is happening now and what is the right thing to do. How do I cooperate with God's grace in this moment, whether it is pleasurable or hard. If it is grace, let me accept. If it is like blissful, let me accept it with gratitude. And if it is difficult, let me also embrace it with trust and try to see what is it I'm supposed to learn. The material consciousness is exactly opposite. When the good things are happening, we start to get anxious. Oh my God, I'm going to lose it. How can I hold on to it? And then when things go bad, we start to feel overwhelmed and confused, and we think God has forgotten about us, you know. So we resist happiness and we blame God. But actually we can embrace the pleasurable grace that comes with gratitude, and when things go wrong, you know, or difficult, also embrace them with compassion and patience. Then our life can always be spiritually blessed, no matter the, how to say, the emotional and physical climate of the specific moment. Jai.
So when we're like really caught up in like material distress, it's best just to have like detachment from the external situation, and also a sense of like just trust, like just trust. But how do you really surrender in that moment? Because sometimes the mind can be so disturbed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, first of all, usually when our mind is disturbed, we abandon it. We judge it, we hate it, we condemn it. Oh, I'm feeling bad, damn it, you know, that sort of a thing. So the first thing we need to practice is acceptance. To not judge yourself because you're, like, if I'm not a bad person because I'm going through some bad times, right? So be able to accept what is with my experience with patience and honesty and humility and compassion. That's the first part of it. And the second part to practice is, what is the loving truth I'm supposed to learn through this? There's always a lesson. There is no randomness in God's creation. So what is the loving, because like usually it might be that something God has arranged to teach me something, but it could also be that I am doing something that is unloving toward me. I'm making some choices in my life that is unloving toward me, not for my highest interest. Or I might be believing a thought that is a lie. Like the most, you know, typical one, you know, I'm not lovable. Or, you know, I have no value, or nobody cares about me. These are lies. These are all lies. And when I believe and I so listen to those voices, I become depressed. So the depression, the suffering lets me know that I'm thinking something that is not true. So that's, again, it tells me, it gives me the cue to go back to the thought. What is it I'm thinking? Oh, I'm not lovable. Turn it around. Because in material ignorance, we always perceive things contradictory to the truth. So that's why, like one teacher, Byron Katie, I was working with, she has this practice, she calls the work, where she identifies a thought that brings suffering to you, and then she says, turn it around. So, and I usually find the truth in that turnaround, because you approach, you know, reality that way. So God does care about me, and I have value. So then I can try to cultivate the loving outlook, and usually that brings a little more soothing. But then you will find that there are parts of you that resist the truth, and then that's why you might need deeper spiritual practice, and even maybe, you know, some counseling or like pastoral counseling, or even I had to do in my own life some deeper inner work and even spiritual therapy in order to process some of those things. So we're going to do that in our seminars. Thank you. The coming days, we'll meet every day, 4:30 to 6 o'clock, going through Cure of Souls in Bhakti, or like inner work, or the integration of psychology in Bhakti, which might be necessary with some anarthas that are persistent even after 10-20 years of spiritual practice. So let's stop here and we'll honor Prasadam. Thank you so much for your participation. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai.